Amen. As I always say when I prepare to preach, and you may get tired of it, but it's true, I don't know how you follow that. Right? Like, what am I supposed to do now? Fantastic job. Thank you so much for sharing your gifts with us. Greetings, First Church. Many of you know me. If you don't know me, I am Jonathan Redding, Dr. Jonathan Redding. You can call me whatever you want. I really don't care. I'm a professor of religion across the street at Nebraska Wesleyan. And as always, it is an honor and a pleasure to be here in this place with you today. Thank you for sharing this time and this space and for allowing me to be here. And today we are going to talk about one of the most misunderstood ideas. We are going to talk about courage. What does courage look like? And what might God be asking us to do with that courage? That's the question I want you to ponder today. If you take nothing else from this sermon, what does courage look like, and what might God be asking you and me and all of us to be doing with courage? Now, Americans especially, as an American myself, we misunderstand courage. We think courage is like Batman or Superman, Captain America, some superhero who comes in with all the answers, all the solutions, and fixes everything with absolute certainty. But the reality is courage is much simpler than that. If you speak to veterans and others who've served in active war zones, if you read interviews from the group Doctors Without Borders or World Central Kitchen, and you hear them talk about courage, the first thing that you would notice is they don't ever say that what they are doing is courageous. They just say that what they are doing is what needs to be done. And in some instances, they say, there's a need, we have the chance to address it, so we will try to address it. And in some instances, being courageous is as simple as putting one foot in front of the other and going somewhere that somebody may not go unless it's you. And what better passage today? For those of you who don't know, I am a Daniel scholar. And whenever I saw that one of the options for today's text to preach on was Daniel, I said, that's it. Let's do it. So you may be thinking, did Dr. Redding just preach on Daniel because he loves Daniel? Well, A, I do love Daniel, but B, this was an option, so I took it. And what better section than Daniel 3, the famous story of the fiery furnace? But in order for us to talk about Daniel, we have to talk about some things that people get wrong with Daniel. Because Daniel is a book that many Christians read, and I'm going to use a word here that may be a little aggressive. Many Christians read it and manipulate it. They take it and they use it to say whatever they want. They use it to justify pain and death. They use it to justify suffering and loss. But Daniel's much more than that. This book that people preach under the umbrella of gloom and doom, of hellfire and over-the-top end-of-the-world scenarios, is what in biblical studies terms and in religious terms in Christian circles, it's an apocalyptic book. Apocalyptic. And whenever we hear the word apocalyptic, we usually think of the end of the world. We think of death, destruction, Armageddon. But the reality is, the word apocalypse comes from the Greek word apokaluphis. Say it with me. 1, 2, 3. Apokaluphis. Look at that. Y'all learning some Greek today. But the word apokalyphes in Greek does not mean to destroy or to eradicate or to end. It means to uncover or to reveal. Sort of like if you've ever played with a dollhouse or an action figure set that you can take the top off of and look inside. That's what it means. Literally, to open up, to reveal, to uncover. So not to destroy, not to end, not to punish, but to reveal or to uncover. And this is where people get led astray with Daniel. Those who preach it and teach it as a fear tactic get it wrong. Because think about it. Think about how often you've heard someone preach Daniel compared to other biblical books. It just doesn't happen. Very rarely do people preach and teach Daniel as compared to the Gospel of Mark, Matthew, Luke, the Pauline epistles, the book of Genesis, the book of Exodus. People just don't preach it. And that is because a lot of the time, people start from the wrong spot. And what better passage for us to consider today than this famous story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Because it is an act of courage, friends. It is an act of courage to consider Daniel. Because if you look at the book of Daniel, and if you see how people are preaching the book of Daniel, it's a very common trend. It is seen as a book that talks about the end of the world and death and famine and destruction. That's how it's taught, but that's not what it's saying. That's what people are saying about it. So we, as the people of God, cannot let Daniel be silent. We, as the people of God, cannot ignore these scriptures. One only needs to read Daniel 3 to see what I mean. And what we hear and think about today is just a drop in the bucket of everything that Daniel can offer us. And so to offer some context, the first thing we have to do with Daniel or any book is to look at the context. Daniel is written in the context of an event called the Israelite exile. It was a horrible time. The Israelites lost everything. Jerusalem was destroyed. Their temple was wiped out by a man named Nebuchadnezzar. We met him today in chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar was king of the Babylonians. The Babylonian Empire was a very strong, powerful military force. The way that they lived and operated is when they would go into an area, they would destroy everything. They would raze it to the ground. Because they believed that in order for you to conquer, you had to break the will of the people you were conquering. And so in this context, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are imprisoned. They have been taken hostage. They have been held hostage and made to work for Nebuchadnezzar. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being made to work for the very person who killed more people than we can fathom and destroyed the place that you live? Can you imagine? And on top of that, we have to correct a wrong as well. Because here's the plot twist. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are not their names. They are the names that Nebuchadnezzar gave them, made them use them. So not only have they lost their homes, their families, their place of worship, Nebuchadnezzar takes the last thing they have from them, their identity, who they are, and gets rid of it. And we know this because in Daniel 1, we are told this. They are not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Let's say their names. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So not only do these people have to live and work for this man, they have to live and work for a man who is ridiculous. In Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar dreams about a giant statue that represents all the kingdoms of the earth, and that statue is destroyed. And so what does Nebuchadnezzar do in Daniel 3? How does Nebuchadnezzar respond to the dream about a destroyed statue? What does he do? He builds a statue. So not only is he a conqueror, he's incompetent. And he also makes this ridiculous edict. The edict of anytime you hear these instruments play, you have to stop what you're doing and bow down to the statue. What? Like, how's that even enforceable? Is the king going to have people follow everybody around and make sure that they bow down and worship when they're supposed to? And also, y'all, this is not the age of the internet and loudspeakers. Like, what if you're a mile down the road and you don't hear the instruments? Like, what are you supposed to do then? So that's the situation that they're in. And the courage that these men show have so many layers to unpack. Because we know that it took courage to even consider disobeying the king's edict. Because we have to look at Daniel 3, we have to look at what these men do as an act of rebellion, an act of protest. Because they look at the man who took everything from them and dare to say no. To say no. That's an act of courage in and of itself. And they do disobey the order. But what's more radical about it, and y'all, if we're going to be honest, if we're really going to wrestle with this text, we have to read it knowing that they didn't know how it was going to end. We read it, and for those of us who may have been raised in the church, for those of us who may have had children's Bibles that had intricately drawn pictures of the flames and the three men and the eventual fourth figure walking around, we read this story and we're like, they're going to be okay. We know how it ends. But they didn't. And they did it anyway. And you may say, what do you mean they didn't know how it ends? Read the text itself. In verses 16 through 18, they say, Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense in this manner. And here is the word. In verse 17, they say, if. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us. Not when, but if. And it's not that they had weak faith, it's that they had faith. They say, if our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. Verse 18 says, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up. They did it anyway. They didn't take this action knowing how it was going to end. The faith and the courage is not believing that you're going to make it out okay. The faith and the courage is doing what you know is the right thing to do, even if you don't know how it's going to end. The courage today, what courage looks like in these verses is if. The word if. And they believe in this if so much, they say if not. And so, like I said before, they don't know how it ends, but we do. They don't know what's going to happen to them, and yet they still did it. Because they believed in those moments that God could use them in some way. Whatever that meant, whatever that looked like. That wasn't up to them, that was up to God. God didn't appear to them before they made their decision in a bush. God didn't come to them in a storm. God didn't come to them in a cloud. No, the faith that they carry and the courage that they carry in chapter 3 is so small to the outside person, you may miss it. But to us, we know what to look for. Their faith is so strong, they dared to say no because they knew it was the wrong thing to worship that statue. They knew that the right thing to do was to say no. And that they didn't know what was going to happen. What courage, what strength, what faith. And so that is where their story measures and mirrors ours. Far too often, people look for these big, grandiose signs from God. We look for flaming fires and lightning storms. We look for clouds. We look for crashing waves. When if we just look and listen for what we know is the right thing to do, that's where God already is. That is where God is calling us to be. Because God isn't going to force us to do the right thing. God isn't going to make us do something. God has given us the choice. God gives us the choice. God gives us the choice and hopes that we act with courage. Because that's what faith is. Because we forget that courage offers no guarantee of success. We choose and hope and we believe that what we are doing is the right thing, and God is there with us. That's what faith looks like. That's what courage looks like. And no one across human history has ever acted knowing how it was going to end. Harriet Tubman didn't know how it was going to end. Malcolm X didn't know how it was going to end. MLK didn't know how it was going to end. Rosa Parks, Harvey Milk, so many people that came before, they took the courage to do the right thing. Because if not, then they did what they knew they had to do. But if. So that's what courage looks like today. What does courage look like? Courage is doing the right thing even if we are the only ones doing it. Courage is living like we know that God is with us, before us, behind us, around us. Y'all, what a gift. What an opportunity to take courage, to have courage, to be courageous. Because if you want to know what courage looks like, people, all you have to do is look in the mirror. Dare to look in the mirror. Dare to see the courage within ourselves. Dare to take courage knowing that God is with us. And so today, take courage. Live and act courageously. Look in the mirror. Live and work in the presence of the eternal God, even if we don't know where that courage might take us. Because God and all of eternity is daring us to do just that. Amen.